So here's the supplies you need for this job. All of this comes from roadstercycle.com. A great guy named Jack Fleming builds these super kits. I'm using his super kit because the goal of this video is to show you the simplest way to do this job, and his super kit is definitely the simplest way to do it. Jack will also sell you the individual components that you can assemble on your own, but this kit comes about as close as it gets to plug and play. What you've got is the connection to the stator here. That goes then, that connector will go right there onto this gray connector, onto the regulator, which will also provide in the kit. You've got then this, which connects to the battery. This connector connects right there onto the regulator. This end connects to the battery. This thing that, here that looks like a fuse is actually a 30 amp automatic reset circuit breaker, very handy. And then finally, just in case the holes on your regulator don't line up with what's on your bike, you can get this mounting bracket that lets you fudge it a bit. Now, all of this is very high quality stuff. Jack does an excellent job of the soldering connections, the shrink wrap. He uses heavy gauge wire. It's PVC armored. He uses, gives you a choice of butt connectors or soldering connectors, depending on what your preference is. I like to solder, but there are plenty of people out there who prefer crimping. The only specialized tools you'd need for this would be either a crimper or a soldering iron, depending on your preference. And you need a heat source. For the shrink wrap, I use a heat gun, but there are plenty of people, of course, who use a lighter or a torch or something like that. And besides that, all you really need are the regular tools that you would use to disassemble and reassemble your bike, which you probably have, or you wouldn't be watching this video or contemplating doing this job. At any rate, let's go. So here are the two regulator rectifiers. They look fairly similar, but they're actually very, very different. This old style that's on the bike is a shunt type, which means that it takes any power that's being generated that's not needed by the bike and dissipates it as heat. It's like a giant heat sink with these fins, and that's why it gets very, very hot when the bike is running. And it actually gets worse the more you upgrade the electrical systems on the bike. For example, adding LEDs and that sort of thing. Because the bike requires a little less power, and thus it has to shunt more power to the heatsink. It's kind of like a giant light bulb, and eventually it can burn out. This newer type works very differently. I can't begin to describe the electronics of it, but basically it's using processors to avoid shunting, and as a result, it doesn't get nearly as hot. It'll still generate some heat. That's why it has these fins, because the rectifier portion of the regulator is always going to generate some heat in the conversion of AC to DC. That's why the little cubes in your house that you plug in when you plug in your computer or clock radio or something like that, that's why those things are always warm, but it actually uses much less electricity. So it's more efficient, and ultimately that you derive a small benefit from that, because it leaves about an extra 3 to 5 watts more for items on your bike that you might want to use. But it's a much more sophisticated device. These are in thousands and thousands of bikes, and work very, very well. Okay, a couple things that while the bike is apart, I should probably point out. Obviously, this isn't a stock bike because you can see that the air injection system is gone and there's an additional thermobob installed here. But you can still see all the basic components, and you can do a couple of things while you're here in the bike. Primarily deal with a couple of electrical rub points that exist on the bike. The first is this cable, which goes across here. You might as well armor it right here. And then, of course, this one here, you can see there's some red armoring that I've installed there. This wire goes across this piece of metal, which I think is sharpened at the factory specifically so that it will eventually cut through this wire. But while you're in there, you can put armoring around this, and also armoring around another wire that goes across that piece of metal up top here. First thing I'm going to do is cut these 3 yellow stator wires and attach them to the new connector that came with the kit. So you can see that I've soldered and heat wrapped the 3 wires leading to the new stator connector, and the next step is to terminate the remaining 3 wires. Okay, so those 3 are terminated. What I did was I just terminated them with Sumatube, which is a shrink wrap tubing that has a liquid insert. When it's heated, it turns the liquid. You can see it dripping out the ends there, I think, and that'll keep those ends pretty much watertight. And then I'll just secure them out of the way. So the next step is to mount the new regulator so that we have a reference point for the wire that's going to go back to the battery. You can see in this case it looks like it's going to mount up on those the mounting holes correctly, which is really nice. Don't need that extra mounting plate. I'm using blue Loctite to mount these, and I suggest you do too. This isn't the kind of thing you're going to take on and off very often, of course, and there's not a lot of threads there going through this backing plate, so you want something that'll hold it on well. And so now we can begin to run the battery wire. Now what I'm doing is this wire, the stator wire, I don't want any of it touching the exhaust, so I've secured it with a zip tie to the empty air injection system bracket. So I'll basically be doubling it back on itself like this and attaching it up like that. I'll wait until the end to do that. So we're going to run the battery cable back. To do that, we need to start it as a reference point here at the regulator. So what I've done is I've removed this screw here, slightly loosened this one. The AIS bracket is in the way otherwise of getting this on. So I've got it loose. I get it up under there, click it into place, and now I'll get everything, I'll put the screws back in and make sure I don't have any rub points there. Now this is going to be pretty hard to see, but I'm going to bring the camera in nice and close. So what I've done is I've tightened this up. I've moved this cable to behind the AIS bracket, and I don't know if you can see, but that leaves a very tiny space between the AIS bracket and the cable. So that eliminates the potential of a rub spot there. I will probably put something on that edge just to be sure because of vibration, but if you run the cable behind the AIS bracket, that usually does the trick. So the way I've routed this is the battery wire takes a sharp turn here. It goes up. It is secured with a zip tie at that other tie down there. You need to run the zip tie on the top of that bracket so the zip tie doesn't slide down. Basically, we're trying to keep this wire away from the cylinder head. It then runs under the gas tank puck here along this. It's secured here with a zip tie to keep everything nice and high off the cylinder head. Then it's going along here. It's secured again with a zip tie at the rear of the frame. That zip tie should be a little bit loose, and the reason why is because you've got an engine bracket right here, and you want to be able to push the wire down if you need to remove that bolt there holding the engine on. And then this will come back here, and now I'll secure it to the battery. Now your battery connection depends a lot on what you've already got going here on the bike. You can see that my battery compartment's a little bit complicated, not including the part what I'm about to install. I already have an Eastern Beaver 3-circuit addition here. That's what all of this stuff is that heads to the front of the bike. And then there's a fuse right here which leads to this battery tender off the side. So basically I'm going to end up undoing the positive and negative terminals, hoping that I've got enough room to attach just 2 more wires, and then I'll be tucking the circuit breaker into this space right here. So I've made my connections at the battery. Here, this is not very nice looking, but the KLR doesn't give you very much room to work with because the fuse needs to be very close to the battery. So what I've done is I've run the positive to the battery there. The negative line runs across here, under this, and then to the negative terminal. And because I don't want a rub spot right here on the edge of this, I'll be wrapping these. So all that's left is to fire it up. You can see on this, so the battery reading here, which is about a 1/10 of a volt low, is 12.9. So the battery's actually reading 13 volts. Let's fire it up. Now it takes a minute for that to warm up.